Good evening. I'm Teresa Skubic, and this is Forum Daily for Thursday, May 1st. Ahead of providing the latest tariff update this morning, New Brunswick Premier Susan Holt touched on the results of the federal election. After congratulating Mark Carney and those who won their seats in New Brunswick, Ms. Holt reiterated how New Brunswick is a unique province with unique needs for its policies and its partnerships.
We need a strong partner at the federal level because there's a lot that we need to do here in New Brunswick that requires partnership between a federal government and the provincial government as well as our municipal partners. We have got to get all hands on deck to tackle the priorities that New Brunswickers have articulated to us. They've made it very clear that they want to see progress in our healthcare system, that they want affordable housing, that they want an economy that is growing and creating good paying jobs for New Brunswickers. And so we have drafted a letter that is being sent to the Prime Minister and his colleagues to lay out New Brunswick's priorities and the things that we are looking forward to working on together. In the first instance, we are very supportive of the federal government's desire to see nation-building projects move forward because Canada is a big country and New Brunswickers want access to it as well as we want Canada's resources to have access to New Brunswick. We want to make sure that Canadians can get access to New Brunswick's ports to get their goods to new markets. We want to make sure that New Brunswick has unimpeded access to other markets in Canada for our products because we have some world-class products here that I know other Canadians would love to receive smoothly, easily, and with no barriers or additional costs. Healthcare is the number one priority for New Brunswickers. It's the number one priority of this government, and we were pleased to see that the federal government articulated support for healthcare infrastructure in their platform. So we will be going to them to talk about how those infrastructure supports are going to help us realize our goal of making sure that every New Brunswicker is attached to a family health team and a collaborative community care clinic all over this province. It's the number one thing that we want to get done.
Ms. Holt also added that New Brunswick is looking to partner with the federal government in order to improve its electricity grid in the interest of strengthening and rendering their energy more resilient. And Nova Scotia Premier Tim Houston held a press conference on Wednesday, and it wasn't long before he was asked about his reaction to the results of the election and what the results mean for his province.
I'm looking forward to working with Prime Minister Carney and his team. I'm excited about some of the initiatives that they've talked about. Certainly the National Energy Corridor and making Canada an energy superpower, those are things that are like really exciting and really exciting for Nova Scotia with the potential that we have here in so many different energy sources, from geothermal to hydro to wind to onshore and offshore to gas onshore and offshore. We have incredible potential in energy, so I'm really excited about that. And I'm just looking forward to working with the Prime Minister and his team.
Premier Houston also talked about the outcome specifically for the Conservatives in the election, given that they only picked up one seat in the province.
Yeah, obviously, I know a lot of the candidates personally. I know like campaigns are hard. You put a lot into them. There's lots of highs and lows. So I certainly I feel for them, the ones that were unsuccessful. I don't read too much into it. I didn't really get that involved in the federal election, but. I think what we've learned. There's always lessons to be learned, and I think there'll be some lessons learned from this campaign. I think the Conservative Party of Canada was very good at pushing people away, not so good at pulling people in, and I think that they probably saw that in some of the results they had across the country. The federal election, I stayed clear of. I wrote to both the letters to both the leaders on issues that matter to Nova Scotians. But I think just on the Conservative movement in general, I think the Conservative Party of Canada. I hope they do some soul searching on what they believe it means to be a Conservative. There are many shades of blue, and I think that people will see that the way I govern, and they'll see that in our caucus and our party members, that we work with Nova Scotians. We'll work with anyone.
Mr. Houston was also asked if he's interested in federal leadership.
So this is a great province.
So are you interested in the federal leadership?
No, I'm focused on Nova Scotia. Moving forward this province. There's a lot we can do in this province. That's my focus.
So no, you said no in front of that. You mean no? No means no?
To what?
The federal leadership.
To the federal leadership.
Oh, I'm focused on Nova Scotians, you guys. That's pretty clear.
Loblaw stores are still adding Canadian products, but its chief executive says the recent Buy Canadian trend may not last. CEO Per Bank says that Loblaw's online grocery service shows a clear pivot toward Canadian products since U.S. tariffs took effect. Mr. Banks says he hopes the trend will continue, but during a call with analysts, he predicted, quote, maybe a third of it will stick long term. Loblaw's reported that its first quarter profit was $503 million this year, compared to $459 million the same time last year. A CIBC economist says that the Canadian economy shrinking 0.2% in February was unexpected. Andrew Grantham says it was likely driven by harsh weather than tariff uncertainty, as poor winter conditions hurt sectors such as mining, oil and gas, transportation, and real estate. Statistics Canada's earliest estimates indicate real GDP increased 0.1% in March. It says that the annualized growth rate for the first quarter, based on the March flash estimate, is 1.5%. U.S. President Donald Trump is acknowledging that his tariffs slapped on dozens of countries could result in fewer and costlier products in the United States. He says American kids might have 2 dolls instead of 30.
Right now, and I told you before, they're having tremendous difficulty because their factories are not doing business. They made $1 trillion with Biden, $1 trillion, even $1.1 trillion with Biden selling us stuff. Much of it we don't need. You know, somebody said, oh, the shelves are going to be open. Well, maybe the children will have 2 dolls instead of 30 dolls, you know. And maybe the 2 dolls will cost a couple of bucks more than they would normally. But we're not talking about something that we have to go out of our way. They have ships that are loaded up with stuff, much of which, not all of it, but much of which we don't need. And we have to make a fair deal. We've been ripped off by every country in the world, but China, I would say, is the leading one, the leading candidate for the chief ripper offer.
But he's also insisting China will suffer more from his trade war and that the U.S. doesn't really need imports from the world's leading manufacturer. A new government report released yesterday shows that the U.S. economy shrank during the first 3 months of the year. When speaking to the press, Mr. Trump blamed former President Joe Biden for the shrinking economy.
You probably saw some numbers today, and I have to start off by saying that's Biden. That's not Trump, because we came in on January, this is the quarterly numbers, and we came in and I was very against everything that Biden was doing in terms of the economy, destroying our country in so many ways, not only at the border was more obvious, but we took over his mess in so many different ways. Core GDP, removing distortions from imports, inventories, and government spending, was up plus 3% when you add it. We had numbers that despite what we were handed, we turned them around, and we were getting them really turned around. Gross domestic investment was a whopping 22%. Now, that is a number that people are coming in at numbers. For instance, I just walked in, I heard Samsung is now, because of the tariffs, they're going to build massive facilities in the United States. If we didn't do the tariffs, they wouldn't be doing that. So it takes a little while to get those facilities built, but they're coming in with big numbers. They're all coming in with big numbers.
Brooklyn Congressman Hakeem Jeffries spoke to the press, stating that it's not Joe Biden's economy. It's Mr. Trump's economy, and the American people know it.
Donald Trump's first 100 days in office have been a disaster. Donald Trump and congressional Republicans are crashing the economy in real time, raising costs on hard-working American taxpayers and driving us toward a painful recession. This is not Joe Biden's economy, Donald. It is your economy. It is the Trump economy. It is a failed economy, and the American people know it. House Democrats and Senate Democrats, standing shoulder to shoulder, are committed to building an economy that actually is affordable and makes life better for everyday Americans. We want to build an economy that lowers housing costs, lowers child care costs, lowers health care costs, lowers grocery costs, and lowers utility costs. We recognize that far too many people in this country are struggling to live paycheck to paycheck. That should not be the case in the wealthiest country in the history of the world. It's time to build an affordable economy, and it's time to build it now.
Former U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris used a high-profile speech in San Francisco to deliver a sharp-edged critique of President Donald Trump's administration, accusing him of wholesale abandonment of American ideals.
The American people deserve leaders who make their lives better and make our country stronger. But sadly, we have seen quite the opposite over these past few months. Now, I know tonight's event happens to coincide with the 100 days after the inauguration, and I'll leave it to others to give a full accounting of what has happened so far. But I will say this. Instead of an administration working to advance America's highest ideals, we are witnessing the wholesale abandonment of those ideals.
Last night's speech was Ms. Harris's most extensive public remarks since leaving office in January after her defeat to Mr. Trump in the presidential election. She praised Democrats who have been especially prolific in criticizing Mr. Trump.
What they have overlooked is that fear is not the only thing that's contagious. Courage is contagious. The courage of Americans who are banding together in the face of the greatest man-made economic crisis in modern presidential history. Americans across the political spectrum who are declaring that the president's reckless tariffs hurt workers and families by raising the cost of everyday essentials, devastate the retirement accounts that people spent a lifetime paying into, and paralyze American businesses, large and small, forcing them to lay off people, to stop hiring or pause investment decisions. The courage of Americans we are seeing who are rallying at Social Security offices to protect their hard-earned benefits. Of Americans who are speaking out to say, it is not okay to violate court orders. Not okay.
And she called the Trump administration a high-velocity event, the result of decades of effort by the political right to shrink the government and privatize its services, quote, all while giving tax breaks to the wealthiest among us. Ms. Harris has not ruled out a run for California governor or another try at the White House. Senate Republicans narrowly voted down a Democratic resolution that would have blocked global tariffs announced by Donald Trump earlier this month, giving the president a modest win Wednesday as lawmakers in both parties have remained skeptical of his trade agenda. Trump announced the far-reaching tariffs on nearly all U.S. trading partners April 2nd, and then reversed it a few days later after a market meltdown, suspending the import taxes for 90 days. Amid the uncertainty for both U.S. consumers and businesses, the Commerce Department said Wednesday that the U.S. economy shrank 0.3% from January through March. We're now going to bring in Stephen Kent from the Consumer Choice Center for more on the vote. Stephen, thanks for being with us today.
Nice to be with you.
Now, how exactly did the votes in the Senate come in? Did any Republicans vote with the Democrats to attempt to end these tariffs?
Yes, so Senator Rand Paul, Republican from Kentucky, was one of the co-sponsors of this measure and worked very hard to try to bring this to a vote in the Senate. He was also joined by Lisa Murkowski and Susan Collins, both who are two predictable, sort of not never Trump necessarily votes, but they are very hard to get moderate Republican votes. And you normally don't see them voting with the likes of Senator Rand Paul, who is incredibly libertarian right out of Kentucky. And so this was sort of an oddball mix. But the nail in the coffin, if you will, for this measure was McConnell, also of Kentucky, not showing up to vote at all. He was absent, as was Sheldon Whitehouse of New Hampshire. And that doomed this measure, bringing it to a tie that was then broken by Vice President J.D. Vance.
Well, why is it that more Republicans aren't skeptical of the trade war, like Senator Rand Paul and Senator Susan Collins?
Well, they definitely are. You have Senator Tom Tillis of North Carolina, Chuck Grassley, Iowa. There are a handful of others who really do not like trade war, and they also don't like tariffs. Tillis and Grassley were working on their own bill to actually rein in tariff power away from the White House. But the problem is that this was a measure that was about ending a state of emergency, an executive order issued on April 2nd by President Donald Trump. It was not necessarily about, passing legislation that was going to expand legislative powers. And the other problem was that this was never going to get a vote in Mike Johnson's all-Republican House. And so a lot of Republicans were looking at this and going, I don't like tariffs, I'm against it, but I'm not going to challenge Donald Trump on something that's not going to actually become law. It's not worth the political risk.
And just how big of an impact is this trade war actually going to have on U.S. consumers?
No, quite a bit. We're going to see a pretty rocky Halloween and Christmas season this year. I mean, Donald Trump just yesterday was speaking in the White House about how American families might have to pick between 2 baby dolls for their children when it comes down to Christmas instead of 20, and maybe even stomach higher prices. There's a recognition right now that the supply chain and prices are going to be incredibly out of whack later this year. It's very important to emphasize that Americans have not yet seen the full shock of trade war and disruption to trade in their supply chains. It's still about to come around the next corner.
Now, Trump's repeatedly made the argument of bringing jobs back to America. Is that realistic or a worthwhile goal to have?
I think it's an absolutely worthwhile goal if you can bring certain things back to American shores without actually harming consumers of those products. That's fantastic. There's a lot of efforts by Apple right now to bring investment back to the United States and even bring some microchips back to the United States under the increasing threat of China possibly one day blockading or invading Taiwan. These are real issues, and they are important for the security of the national or the national security of the United States. But the problem is that's autarky if you try to do that for everything. We are not actually equipped to produce everything within our own borders. We have an economy that is very, very robust and powerful for consumers because we are able to partner with other nations around the world for the supplies and the products that our people need and want. So I don't think that it's a reasonable goal if you're absolutist about it.
Now, some businesses like Amazon have actually flirted with the idea of showing the cost of tariffs when they bill customers. Would that be helpful in terms of letting U.S. customers know exactly what the impact is going to be when they're buying products?
Absolutely. I liked the idea that Amazon had initially floated about showing basically the tariff tax on all of your orders out of Amazon. It would have done a great job of clarifying for people just why their prices are rising. But at this point, it has seemed that Amazon backed down from this. I know Donald Trump made a personal phone call to Jeff Bezos and definitely chewed him out over this. And they have since said they were never going to do any such thing, which is regretful. I think it actually would be useful for consumers to understand this issue better.
Well, Donald Trump made the phone call, but the White House also called it a hostile and political act by Amazon. So what do you make of their response to Amazon's idea of showing the cost? The White House has really backed up the tariffs and said that they're going to be beneficial. So why do they go into attack mode when companies are saying we're going to support it, but we just want to show the consumers what they're going to be dealing with?
I think that we have a White House and a Republican Party right now that is very much at odds with the private sector. This is not the party of Mitt Romney that I grew up in when I was a young man, who generally was deferential to the private sector and to corporations. This Republican Party of J.D. Vance and Donald Trump considers our most successful and powerful domestic firms to be opponents. And this is just one more example of that.
Now, the president has blamed the slowdown in the market on Joe Biden. Are Americans buying the claim that this is somehow Joe Biden's fault?
Not necessarily. There is a poll just out yesterday from Yahoo News and YouGov showing that 55% of Americans feel a great amount of stress over the tariffs that we're seeing right now. 59% said they are more anxious than they were a year ago. And 58% of Americans generally feel that their financial situation is being harmed by what's going on right now in Washington, D.C. There is very little evidence that people are putting this at the feet of Joe Biden. I think Americans are pretty shrewd in this, actually. When things are being mismanaged and prices are spiking, they blame whoever is in the Oval Office at that time. And Donald Trump is going to shoulder a lot of this, as are his Republican allies in Congress, who are staring down possibly brutal midterms next year.
Well, Stephen, thank you so much for the time today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
A retired businessman said he defeated conservative leader Pierre Poilievre in his own riding by listening to voters. Bruce Fanjoy says he wasn't surprised by his win because he knew how hard his team had worked and how many hours they put into the race. Mr. Fanjoy has knocked on more than 15,000 doors in Ottawa's area riding since he began campaigning 2 years ago. Voters ousted Mr. Poilievre after 21 years, electing Mr. Fanjoy by a margin of more than 4,300 votes. A group trying to make the case for electoral reform by creating a long list of names on the ballot is declaring success. The longest ballot committee contributed 85 of the candidates on the ballot in conservative leader Pierre Poilievre's former riding. Mark Mutter of Montreal was among the candidates and says that he thinks people who don't like the group's activities are in the minority. Canada's chief electoral officer has pushed back on the group's advocacy and said that there is a very long ballot and it poses problems for some people with disabilities. Several conservative MPs are expressing support for party leader Pierre Poilievre after he lost both the federal election and his seat on Monday. The loss puts the party in an awkward position of having to choose an MP to serve as party leader in the House of Commons. Ontario MP Arpan Khanna said on social media that Mr. Poilievre, quote, delivered the highest vote percentage in modern conservative history. A conservative MP would likely have to step down to allow Mr. Poilievre to run for a seat, but the party has not yet answered questions on the possibility of running elsewhere. However, there is a growing rift between the federal Conservatives and the Ontario Conservatives. In an interview with CBC, Durham Member of Parliament Jamil Javani accused Doug Ford of supporting the Liberals.
Doug Ford just went through an election. I have differences of opinion with him. I don't like how he's managed healthcare or education. But out of respect, we didn't say anything. Federal party, we didn't get in his way. When it was our turn to run an election, he couldn't stay out of our business. Always getting his criticisms and all his opinions out, distracting our campaign, trying to make it about him, trying to position himself as some kind of political genius. I see Doug Ford as a problem for Ontario and for Canada. I think he's not doing a great job in running this province, and now he's trying to exercise his influence over other levels of government, and it's not like this guy is doing anything particularly well. I mean,
you did used to work for him.
I did. I'm speaking from experience. I tried to fix problems in this province, and he kept getting in his way and all his goons around him all the time. They wouldn't make anything better, and now we're seeing him because this guy's a political genius because he beat Bonnie Crombie and Stephen Del Duca, and now we got to sit around getting advice from him? No. He has taken the provincial Conservative Party and turned it into something hollow, unprincipled, something that doesn't solve problems. He's glad-handing with Chrystia Freeland, having coffees and lattes with Mark Carney. And I'm sitting here saying we need to be fighting for change and something new and something different, not being a hype man to the Liberal Party.
And in response, Premier Doug Ford accused the federal Conservatives of telling their staff to not help the PCs in the last provincial election.
I shouldn't interfere in the federal election. Last time I checked, Pierre Poilievre never came out in our election. Matter of fact, him or one of his lieutenants told every one of his members, don't you dare go out and help the PCs. Isn't that ironic? But anyways, I'm not going to dig deep into this. The people spoke. And I have no say in who people vote for. But I'll tell you one thing. We have a government, democratically elected. I will hold them accountable. I'll hold them accountable like I would no matter if it's a conservative government or a liberal government. My interest is protecting the people of Ontario. And I will be all over this government. They know I will be, as I was before, about being tough on crime.
Joining us now is our correspondent, Wyatt Sharp, for more on the controversy. Wyatt, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks so much. Always happy to.
Now, where did this feud start between the Ontario PCs and the federal Conservatives?
Yeah, I mean, it really all started, I guess you could go back really to Corey Teneycke, who was Doug Ford's campaign manager in 2018, 2022, and of course, the most recent provincial election as well. And he's a noted political commentator on a variety of different news programs. He came out and openly criticized the Poilievre Conservatives for not really getting away from kind of some of the issues that had been dogging the election campaign and talking about some of the issues that voters care about. And so that ultimately led to Poilievre come out and and a lot of Poilievre's folks, and of course Jenny Byrne, who was also Doug Ford's principal secretary. There's kind of been this full circle moment of just people on the Poilievre campaign and people from Doug Ford's team going back and forth at one another. You know, it's interesting. You mentioned in the introduction that a lot of the Poilievre folks right now are using kind of the reasoning that Poilievre received kind of the highest vote in a number of years for the Conservative Party as a reason to kind of define success for them in this election. And it kind of reminds me of 2020 when Donald Trump lost the presidential election and he came out and he said, well, we still received upwards of 70 million votes, which of course is just because voter turnout was higher, of course, as it was in this election campaign as well. So that's certainly one component to kind of discuss with respect to this. But I mean, I also find it a little bit ironic that Jamil Javani and, other MPs within the Conservative Party are coming out and criticizing Doug Ford and the provincial Conservatives. Meanwhile, Doug Ford has won 3 consecutive majority governments, all while the federal Conservatives just lost their 4th consecutive election.
Well, Jamil Javani accused Premier Ford of effectively backing the Liberals. But how credible are these claims, and what evidence, if any, does he have to support them?
Yeah, I mean, I posted about this on social media as well. I think, saying that certain party members aren't conservative enough or putting blame and creating excuses as to why you lost the election is exactly the type of patterns that will ultimately lead to you losing the next election campaign as well. So certainly, I and many others have been critical of that. But I do think that with respect to Doug Ford, he's just governing, as he'll say, on, kind of a Team Canada basis right now, especially with these tariffs and some of the other geopolitical challenges that have been present in kind of our political climate as of late. Intergovernmental cooperation between the federal government and the province is certainly something of importance. And so for the Conservatives to come out and, call Doug Ford a liberal all because he's willing to kind of collaborate with the federal government seems a little bit ironic and certainly in bad taste.
Now, you did just touch on this, but how much could this feud really divide the Conservative Party of Canada as MPs begin to point the finger of blame at other people?
Yeah, and I mean, it's not just the PC party in Ontario who's casting kind of doubt on the federal Conservatives. You saw the Premier of Nova Scotia, Tim Houston, come out and kind of exercise his right to be critical as well of the federal Conservatives. It's interesting because usually, for whatever reason, if a party leader is unsuccessful in an election campaign, almost immediately after there's talk about his or her future. And for whatever reason, Pierre Poilievre, despite not even being able to win his own seat in a riding he's held for more than 20 years, since 2004, has just kind of this grasp on the Conservative Party where people are not calling for him to step down like they were in 2022 or 2021 rather, under Aaron O'Toole, where you saw kind of consecutively one MP after the other come out and say that it was time for Mr. O'Toole to step down. So that's certainly interesting to me. But I do think that eventually you'll start to see kind of an increased divide within the party. This election was supposed to be very winnable for the Conservatives. And, the fact that Pierre Poilievre is the best candidate to go up against Mark Carney, according to some MPs, for a rematch, despite not being able to win again this time, even when they had a 25-plus point lead in the polls in January, is certainly something that is bound to get some criticism moving forward.
And what are the possible scenarios for Poilievre's political future if he doesn't secure a seat soon?
Yeah, well, the minimum amount of time with respect to how soon he could secure a seat is 47 days, because, of course, the government still has to get sworn in. Mark Carney would need to call a by-election. But if I was Mark Carney, if I was the prime minister, politically speaking and strategically speaking, it doesn't make a lot of sense to be in a big rush to try and have Pierre Poilievre become an MP again in the House of Commons, because, of course, that is one good thing, and one kind of praise we can give to Pierre Poilievre is he's very sharp and very strong when he's in the House of Commons. So Mark Carney obviously would not want that to happen. And from a procedural standpoint as well, Pierre Poilievre right now is not the leader of the official opposition, despite being the leader of the Conservative Party, meaning his salary has to be paid by the Conservative Party. He has to move out of Stornoway, which is the official residence for the leader of the opposition. And so it's going to create kind of some changes in his personal life as well. So it's not really unprecedented that a party leader is not an MP. You saw that for kind of the first 2 weeks of Mark Carney's prime ministership. It just certainly makes things much more difficult. And now the Conservatives are going to have to look to appoint someone to be kind of the leader of the opposition, which is likely probably going to be the House leader. You've heard people like Andrew Scheer's name be floated around as well.
Well, you did just mention Andrew Scheer, but if it's not Poilievre, are there any other names being thrown around right now to replace Pierre Poilievre other than Andrew Scheer, as you've just mentioned?
Yeah, well, I mean, Andrew Scheer wouldn't necessarily be kind of a permanent replacement. He might be someone that the party looks to for an interim leader or someone to lead the party in the House, as he's done for the past number of years under Pierre Poilievre and even Aaron O'Toole as well. But you mentioned this, and it's a big problem that not only the Conservatives, but especially the NDP is having right now. And that's with respect to the fact that there are really no obvious frontrunners for either of the two parties' leadership contests, assuming the Conservatives eventually will have to enter one. For the NDP, as an example, like you have Alexandre Bollaris from riding in Quebec, Rosemont Le Petit-Patry. He's certainly one example for the NDP's leadership because he was one of the few MPs to hold on to his riding, much less hold on to it in Quebec. For the Conservatives, I mean, you're likely to have a number of people possibly step forward. The question is, are they going to be able to do what Mr. Poilievre failed to do? And again, the Conservatives have really experimented with all kinds of conservatism at this point. Pierre Poilievre, who's kind of that alt-right portion of the party, Aaron O'Toole, who's
Wyatt,
really
I'm
himself
so sorry.
experimented
I
with
do have
various
to
forms.
interrupt you. We've ran out of time,
Go
but
ahead.
thank you so much for the time today.
Thank you.
A series of videos taken the night of an alleged group sexual assault involving 5 former members of Canada's World Junior Hockey team were played inside a London, Ontario court on Wednesday. The videos, including one of the female complainant, were taken in the early morning hours of June 19, 2018 at the Delta Hotel and were shown on Wednesday at the trial of Michael McLeod, Carter Hart, Alex Formanton, Dylan Dubé, and Cal Foote. In one video taken at 4:26 a.m., a young woman can be seen holding a white towel against her body, smiling and looking at the camera. It was all consensual, she said, before asking if she was being filmed. Event planners across Canada are rethinking their security practices following the attack of a Vancouver street festival that killed 11 people and injured dozens more. Kelly Curda of the Greater Victoria Festival Society says she spoke with police and fire officials on Wednesday morning after the attack on Saturday, April 26th, to ensure there wasn't more they could do to secure the upcoming Victoria Day parade. BC Premier David Eby spoke to the press on Tuesday and said the province will gather information on how to best secure events to minimize risk to the public.
In the interim, I know that there are also a group of people looking for answers and advice and information. Anyone that's thinking about hosting a public event over the summer, bringing British Columbians together to celebrate, what do we need to do? How do we plan for this? What if this happens to us? And we can't wait to get those answers. So we will hold an independent commission. It will be a quick turnaround, gathering information on best practices from other jurisdictions, understanding from police in Vancouver, across the province and internationally, how best to practically secure events to minimize risk to the public so that people can feel safe and comfortable attending and celebrating with their communities this summer in British Columbia. My hope is that the Commission will have full answers for organizers, for cities big and small across the province by June, so that organizers can go ahead and plan and be prepared and do what they can to minimize risk to the public and allow us to gather and celebrate as we need to, as is so important for British Columbians.
Elections Canada says it will investigate what it calls shortcomings that prevented some people in northern Quebec from voting. News reports said polling stations in some Nunavut communities closed hours early, apparently because weather conditions were affecting flights for election workers. In some cases, polling stations reportedly didn't open at all. The northern region of Quebec is the homeland of Inuit in the province, and the organization representing Quebec Inuit says it is deeply disappointed by the way the vote was handled. The U.S. and Ukraine have agreed to an economic deal after a weeks-long press by President Donald Trump calling on Ukraine to compensate Washington for billions in military and economic assistance to repel the Russian invasion. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said in a video posted on X on Wednesday that the partnership enables America to invest in Ukraine, unlocking the country's assets to enhance investment climate and accelerate economic recovery.
Thanks to President Trump's tireless efforts to secure a lasting peace, I am glad to announce the signing of today's historic economic partnership agreement between the United States and Ukraine, establishing the United States-Ukraine Reconstruction Investment Fund. This partnership allows the United States to invest alongside Ukraine to unlock Ukraine's growth assets, mobilize American talent, capital, and governance standards that will improve Ukraine's investment climate and accelerate Ukraine's economic recovery. The Development Finance Corporation will participate and help to establish this fund in collaboration with the government of Ukraine. Today's agreement signals clearly to Russian leadership that the Trump administration is committed to a peace process centered on a free, sovereign, and prosperous Ukraine over the long term. It's time for this cruel and senseless war to end. The killing must stop, and both the United States and the government of Ukraine look forward to quickly operationalizing this historic economic partnership for both the Ukrainian and American people.
For Ukraine, the agreement is seen as key to ensuring its access to future U.S. military aid. The National Post's Adam Zivo joined us from Ukraine this morning for more on the significance of the deal.
The significance of this deal cannot be understated. It essentially locks the United States and Ukraine into an ongoing economic partnership that ensures that American taxpayers feel as if they've been adequately compensated for the assistance that they've provided going forward. Now, an important distinction between this draft of the deal and a draft that was published earlier this year is that it doesn't portray previous military aid to Ukraine as a loan. So in the initial draft, essentially, Ukraine was expected to retroactively pay the United States back for military aid, which had initially been portrayed as a gift. And that's, of course, something that would have significantly discredited U.S. military support because other allies wouldn't be able to trust that if they received aid that was framed as a gift from the U.S., that, they wouldn't be on the hook for repaying it later. So that was a huge benefit. On top of that, this agreement ensured that Ukrainian sovereignty was maintained. That was something that was explicitly stated within the deal. And that, of course, ensured that that Ukraine was able to comply with its obligations to the EU and continue down its EU membership path. And on top of that, so Ukraine and the United States were portrayed as 50-50 partners where neither was allowed to fully dominate the other. Ukraine was given essentially full control over how its resources are developed. And that's something which, once again, is much fairer compared to the initial deal where the United States was given sweeping control over Ukraine's natural resource industry going forward. I mean, in the original draft, the United States essentially was going to turn Ukraine into an economic colony and would have had, for example, almost total control over what licenses are granted. That's all gone. Here you see real reciprocity and real mutual respect. So I think that the current draft is, of course, a huge benefit for Ukraine. Well, it is crucial that the United States maintain its military support for Ukraine. Ukraine is becoming increasingly autonomous when it comes to its military needs. So as of now, it produces around 40% of its weapons and receives about 30% from the EU and then 30% from the United States. So Ukraine can survive without Washington's help, but obviously it's much more difficult. And with the front lines being, quite dire sometimes, everything helps. However, I think that American voters haven't been told in some cases how much this aid actually assists them, right? How with less than 5% of their annual defense budget, they've been able to empower Ukraine to cripple one of the United States' key global geopolitical rivals, right? And that's an oversight, unfortunately. And so many American taxpayers are saying, well, what's in it for us? So this deal ensures that these taxpayers feel as if they're being adequately compensated for their support and that, this money is not just coming completely out of their pockets and that Ukrainians are paying for their aid, their own military assistance through this economic partnership. Now, an important provision that was in this contract, this economic agreement that was once again missing from the earlier one, is that for the first 10 years, all revenues that are created, through this natural resource industry, through this partnership, are reinvested back into Ukraine, right? So we can see then that this revenue will be actually used to keep Ukraine safe rather than just to extract Ukraine as well to enrich American investors while Ukraine remains vulnerable and in a state of war.
Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney spoke with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky on Wednesday and underscored Canada's commitment to supporting Ukraine in achieving lasting peace and security. The Prime Minister's office said in a statement that Mr. Zelensky congratulated Mr. Carney on his election in Monday's vote, and that the two leaders agreed that a durable peace can only be achieved with Ukraine at the table. Canada's Stanley Cup hopes just got a little slimmer. We're down to 4 teams after the Canadiens were sent packing last night. Montreal's playoff run ended with a 4-1 loss to the Capitals in Washington, dropping their first-round series in 5 games. But the Jets are still flying high. Winnipeg bounced back to take the lead in their series against St. Louis, winning Game 5 with a score of 5-3. And tonight, 2 more Canadian teams will try to punch their ticket to the next round. The Edmonton Oilers are back home for Game 6 against the LA Kings. Meanwhile, the Toronto Maple Leafs are back in enemy territory in Ottawa, trying to once again shut the door on the Senators. Montreal-born filmmaker Sean Levy will be inducted into Canada's Walk of Fame this year. Mr. Levy broke out with 2002 teen comedy Big Fat Liar and went on to helm big-budget family films such as Night at the Museum franchise and action blockbusters including Deadpool and Wolverine. The Walk of Fame will be honored this year's inductees at a ceremony in Toronto in June. I'm Teresa Skupik, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. For more news on demand, you can always visit our website at forumdailynews.ca and make sure to follow us on our social media handles on X and TikTok. You can also watch all of our commentary programming on the News Forum YouTube channel. Thanks for joining us on Forum Daily News. We'll see you next time. Good night, Canada.